Alright, I don't have too long of an intro for this video, so I'm just gonna jump right in. Don't want to waste time and sit in my very cold bedroom for too long, so welcome back to 10 Years Later, the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. And as you can tell by the title, the album that we'll be discussing today is the 2011 Chris Brown album, F.A.M.E, which stands for either Forgiving All My Enemies or Fans Are My Everything. This was the fourth studio album from controversial R&B superstar Chris Brown, who back in 2011 was maintaining a very high commercial profile. He was continuing to release big singles that were peaking in and around the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100. It was safe to say he was still one of the biggest artists on the planet, and even with his seeming inability to escape controversy, listeners continued to play his music. His infamous domestic violence case with Rihanna was surprisingly not enough to cancel him, even though it continues to dog him to this day and will continue to for as long as he lives, and even beyond that, I'd say. In 2011, I don't even think he was quite prepared for how much it would dog him, as evidenced by an incident where he threw an object out a window in Times Square during a commercial break when he was on Good Morning America, seemingly after being asked on the show about the domestic violence incident. Hard to imagine, but guess what? A lot of people won't forgive you for domestic violence no matter how long ago it was. Now, despite all of the controversy, as I mentioned, Chris Brown has commercially been unaffected by it. In fact, this album was actually his first to go #1 on the Billboard 200, and it even got nominated for a Grammy for Best R&B Album. Personally, I haven't been the biggest fan of Chris Brown, and it's his toxic personality and controversies that often turn me away from him, but I have enjoyed some of his music before, perhaps more than I truly should. I know, a lot of it sounds the same and he's been writing similar sounds for years, and should I really be spending my time on a human being who has done and continues to do toxic things with what feels like no accountability for any of it? Probably not, but despite there being every reason for me to stay away, I can't help but pay attention. I guess it's that Chris Brown has ascended into the tier where even if he's reprehensible, you kinda can't help but watch to see what happens next. And that leads me to his music, which is often generic, formulaic, and often punching below its weight given how talented Chris is, yet sometimes it's stupidly catchy enough to work. And with that in mind, I was interested to see if F.A.M.E was a similar case. It's 18 tracks stretching just over an hour, which despite being very long might as well be pittance compared to the 30 to 50 track albums that he puts out today, whose runtimes stretch about as long as most Marvel movies do. And sadly, even a Chris Brown album that's on the short end just doesn't feel all that captivating. Much of this album shifts between dance pop jams with some hip hop influence and a bit of old school R&B. Sadly, it seems like Chris doesn't nail either sound and only has scattered bursts of success. Much of the album as a result ends up feeling like filler. Deuces was a single from Chris and Tyga's F.A.M.E mixtape from 2010, and it has the exact same chord progression of every early 2010s pop song, complete with a boring chorus, forgettable Tyga verse, and a Kevin McCall verse that goes in one ear and out the other. Kevin McCall also returns on No BS, another track from that F.A.M.E mixtape. It's really strange to me how the album starts with so much old material, and while it does play into some R&B vibes that I like, the beat is pretty forgettable and the lack of a strong hook kinda sinks this one. Also, I'll be honest, I was never really all that into Look at Me Now despite how big of a single it was, and listening to it along with the rest of the album didn't really change that. There are things I do like about it. The beat goes really hard, Busta Rhymes' super fast verse is obviously iconic, and I do enjoy Lil Wayne's verse too, even if some of his bars obviously haven't aged well. But I don't care for Chris Brown himself on the track, and the chorus has always come across to me as more annoying than anything. Say It With Me feels like a total throwaway. It's just a super generic pumping electronic track that feels like something Chris could churn out in his sleep. It doesn't hook, it doesn't feel fun, it's just a boring relic of yesteryear. She Ain't You is built around a sample of Human Nature by Michael Jackson, who was of course Chris's biggest inspiration and someone he's sampled and interpolated very often. It's a noble effort, but Chris just doesn't really sell the song. I admire the attempt because it takes some brass balls to make what is essentially a remix of an iconic Michael Jackson song, but vocally he just never gets there. He sounds nice, but he never fully owns the track, and it's sad. When you do what Chris did with a Michael Jackson song, expectations are going to be sky high, which is why it's disappointing that Chris's track is just fine. All Back is a pretty generic piano ballad, and while Chris's vocals are suited well for this type of song, it's another track with a chorus that just kind of kills it. It's not the absolute worst, it just does nothing for me. Wet the Bed is also pretty forgettable too. While it does have a nice sultry R&B vibe to it, Chris himself feels like he has very little presence on the track, and it just feels kind of boring. It's nothing special, and not even Ludacris's bouncy verse makes things any better. And while Chris Brown has done done dance pop sounds well in the past and even does now. Oh My Love is not one of those examples. Even though he delivers his lines in a much faster way, I think this would honestly be a better song if it was slower. The pumping sound just doesn't work, and even for all of its energy, it feels so phoned in and forgettable. The closer to the album's standard edition, Beautiful People, produced by Benny Benassi, is an electro anthem that just doesn't work for me. When you make a song like this that follows a very repetitive structure, you have to make sure it hooks well. And unfortunately, much like a lot of this album, the track just doesn't. While the song may have had some good intentions, it's only memorable for the wrong reasons. And then there are bonus tracks, most of which fail to captivate whatsoever. Bomb comes across as more annoying than anything, only being slightly saved by a passable Wiz Khalifa verse. Love the Girls is a decent idea of a track that once again gets ruined by an annoying chorus, only being slightly lifted by the game's guest verse. Paper Scissors Rock sounds almost like a regurgitation of the last track, and even though Chris's chorus isn't too bad for once, the flood of autotune makes it a bit harder to enjoy. At least Timbaland and Big Sean have a little bit of fun with it, I guess. Beg For It is another mellow R&B track that just feels too sleepy for me. I guess it's smooth enough to not be one of the album's worsts, but I've heard this sound done way better by several other artists, including Chris himself. And the final track, Champion, is actually a song by British rapper Chip, formerly Chipmunk, that Chris Brown featured on. Chris himself does provide a very passionate verse on the song, but otherwise it's another pretty generic track that has nice inspirational vibes and not much else. There are a few scattered highs on the record, but they are extremely few and far between. Up To You is one of the points where the album works, as it taps into that timeless old school R&B sound that Chris can sell so well with his smooth vocals. And I'll also admit I did used to enjoy the single Yeah 3 Times, and I still do now. Sure, it definitely screams 2010 with its bumping dance pop vibes and heavy synths, but Chris actually manages to sell the song with a decent vocal presence and a super sticky chorus. I was also pleasantly surprised by Next to You, a collaboration with a young Justin Bieber that still sounds pretty good. It's a light ballad that'll probably sound very standard to some, but I think Chris and Justin's vocal interplay helps elevate this one a good bit. And Should Have Kissed You is a pretty pleasant surprise near the end of the standard edition of the album. It's a lighter cut centered around heartbreak, and I think Chris does a much better job of crafting a good hook on this one. His vocals are a bit more fragile, fitting the emotional vibe of the song, and they make it work pretty well. It's just too much of a shame that these few highlights require sitting through so much forgettable music to get to them. Overall, I wanted Chris Brown's 2011 album to be a hidden gem, but it really isn't. I don't deny that Chris may have been hungry on this album, but much of it just feels forgettable and way too bloated with what feels like filler material. As I mentioned, Chris's tracks usually blend between dance pop and classic R&B with a little bit of hip hop in there as well, but it feels like there's never one sound that he properly nails. He does a few of them decently, but never makes it all the way there. And I think the big reason why is because so few of these tracks genuinely hook. No matter what genre or style he's going with, Chris to me is at his best when he's making tracks with sticky, fun hooks. I think that's why I actually didn't hate his 45-track epic Heartbreak on a Full Moon, because no, it didn't need to be that long, but a number of the tracks were catchy and fun enough to work. Here though, it feels like many of the attempts at hooks just come across as grating instead of fun, and they sink the album. If there's no hook, there's no point. It's just gonna feel like music that goes in one ear and out the other. And unfortunately, that's just what most of this album does. Chris himself doesn't build these tracks well enough and often gets overshadowed by his guest artists, leaving this to be nearly doomed from the start. I know that the acronym in the title stands for Fans Are My Everything, and yeah, I see that because this is strictly for Chris's most hardcore fans. It feels like he made it only for them and told anyone who's not a hardcore stan to see themselves out. I guess I should have taken that advice. Back in 2011, I wasn't a gigantic Chris Brown fan, so I don't know if I would have been all that into this thing. And listening to it now, yeah, I'm not digging it. If I had to put a rating on it, it's gonna be an awful for me. I know there will probably be people who disagree, but this album feels very in one ear and out the other for me. It'll be surprising to say, but I'd take Heartbreak on a Full Moon over this, and that album had 45 tracks. I know, very strange. But as always, that's just my opinion on this album. Maybe you guys like it more than I do. Maybe you hate it as much as I do. What did you guys think about it, and what are your experiences with it? Did you listen to it back in 2010 when it first came out? Do you still listen to it now? Did you love it back then, hate it back then, love it now, hate it now? Do you think it's secretly one of Chris Brown's better records? Do you think it's actually one of his worst? Whatever your thoughts and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe, thank you. If not, it's no big deal at all. I totally understand. And if you guys want to support my passion for content creation by subscribing to my OnlyFans, where I create exclusive music review and poetry content for $4.99 a month, the link to that is in the description. Again, it's no big deal if you can't or don't want to. I know that times are tough right now, so I totally get it, and I appreciate anyone who is able to. And moving right along, the next album that I'll be talking about in 10 Years Later is going to be Panic at the Disco's Vices and Virtues. I don't really have any experience with that album, and I only have very little Panic at the Disco experience, but I'm still interested, so stay tuned for that. But until next time, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.